Thanks very much, Jane. I too would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, their elders past and present, and pay my respects to them. It's great to be back in Canberra. My wife, Carmel, is a Canberra girl. She's with me tonight, brought up in Yarralumla and went to St Peter Schnell School. There you go. So look, we're talking about whistleblowers tonight, and the reason that we have to have whistleblowers, of course, is because of the secrecy that's been put on by governments of both persuasions ever since 1992, really, when we first introduced mandatory detention in this country. That's 25 years next year of shame, isn't it? So my interest in this, if you like, apart from just being a good citizen like all you people here tonight, and I thank you for your presence, is that I work at the Children's Hospital in Sydney and Westmead Hospital, and I ran a refugee clinic since 2005, so that's over 10 years now. And I started it because I'm an infectious disease physician, as Jane said, and we were having kids arriving with malaria parasites in their blood, and we didn't know what to do about it. And I went to see them at the adult hospital with their parents, and then I said, we better start up a clinic for the children. So I began seeing refugee children from an infectious disease health point of view. But increasingly over the years, we've been seeing children of asylum seeker families with severe mental health problems. We've now started administering a questionnaire to all of the children who arrive, and in the last year, over 60% of the children that we see have post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, why do you get post-traumatic stress disorder? So this government, of course, will blame the victims, and they'll say, well, it comes from their country of origin, it comes from the terrible boat journeys they've taken, and they will deny that it's got anything to do with immigration detention. But that's not correct. Because yes, you do get post-traumatic stress disorder from terrible traumas in the country of origin, and yes, you get them from going on terrible boat journeys. But we know that people who've also been in prolonged, indefinite immigration detention get increased mental health problems. So we are damaging people by putting them in prolonged detention. And as Paul will tell you later on, it's not just prolonged detention, it's not being in control of your fate. You do not know when you're going to get out. It's worse than being an Australian convicted criminal in prison, because at least a convicted criminal knows when they're going to get out and how they can then get on with their life again. So in 2011, a nurse came to work with us as our clinic coordinator. We'd had a different coordinator before then. She was a rather feisty young English nurse called Alana Maycock. And she said to me, David, you don't advocate enough for this. I should do my Cockney accent. David, you don't advocate enough for these people, she said to me. And I said, well, if you're going to advocate, you've got to have people who's going to listen to you. You've got to be able to publicise it. And I would try writing newspaper articles, and the newspaper wouldn't run them. How do you write articles about children with post-traumatic stress within your clinic? And then, as Jane said, my son Mark went to Nauru, and he went there with the Salvation Army, and we'll hear later on from Hayley, and Jane herself went with the Salvation Army. Hayley went with the Save the Children, but you'll hear from other people who've worked with the Salvation Army. And basically, he went there as to try and help the men on Nauru. It was only men in those stage. And he was so horrified by what he saw that he came back, he kept a diary, and eventually he wrote it up as a book, The Undesirables, as Jane mentioned. And I think I was very... I found Mark's stress highly emotional. He was terribly upset by what he saw, and he had terrible trouble coping with it, but he was also inspiring to me. And subsequently, I was offered to go to Nauru for a short while to work with children in detention there and to see children in consultation for a very short visit, 5 days. Now, one of my colleagues, Hasanta Gunnar-Sakera, had been there previously and was not even allowed to see where the people lived. So I said I needed to see where the people lived, if that was the case, the tents they were living in, And I needed a nurse with me to help me. And so Alana and I went together. And we were horrified by what we saw. Every child we saw was traumatised, but really highly traumatised. We've described some of the most awful things that we saw with these children who were self-harming, a child as young as 6 who tried to hang herself. We saw children a 15-year-old boy who'd sewed his lips together. These were frightful things, and again and again and again we saw families who were traumatised. The parents were traumatised, the children were traumatised. They're the worst families I've ever seen, and the moral distress for us was incredible. The mothers were absolutely vulnerable. The showers were 50 to 120 metres from the tents that they were living in. So you're living in a tent, the guard can walk in any time on you in the tent, but then if you want to go for a shower, you have to, at night, run a gauntlet where there may be guards watching you. The guards would regularly look at the women in the showers. They would offer them extra time in the showers for sexual favours, which was incredibly demeaning for these women. And if they reported it, nobody would believe them. They would deny it. The guards would say that didn't happen. Women were assaulted. One of the women cried for 10 minutes on my shoulder about having been raped when she went to the showers. I'd never seen anything like this. And as Jane said, when we came back, Alana and I said after about a week, we'd been back still shattered. Are you sleeping? No, I'm having nightmares. So am I. So we're having nightmares after 5 days in Nauru? What are the families doing? They've been there 14 months on average at that stage. It was devastating. So then I said, we've got to speak up. And actually, when I was talking to the families, I thought, what can I say that's positive? And I'd say to them, there are people in Australia who care. The fact that the guards here or the healthcare staff here call you by your numbers instead of your names, that's not true in all of Australia. In Australia, there are plenty of people who care. And I'll be talking to those people and saying, come on, we shouldn't be doing this. And I will publicise it, I promise you. And that's all I felt I could offer these families in the time that I was there, because everything else was just Band-Aid. So we came back, we wrote an article. I said to my son, I'm a bit worried, we're going to get prosecuted for this? I'd signed a contract saying I wouldn't do such a thing. And so he put me in touch with Julian Burnside, the lawyer. And I have to say, Julian Burnside's my hero. He was somewhat my son's hero, and he's my hero as well. And he just said, David, he says, they won't prosecute you. I really like your article. He said, but if they do, I'll give you the best defence you could ever have for nothing. I said, that's fantastic. If I go to prison? He said, no, don't worry, you won't go to prison. I said, is it me that goes to prison or you? Shut up, David. It's all right. And subsequently, I've had a number of young doctors and healthcare workers who've been scared. And Hayley, who's going to talk, she will tell you how scary it is to be a whistleblower. It is. Look, I'm a 65-year-old doctor and I was scared. Okay, so what about these youngsters? How are they going to speak up? And Julian Burnside again and again has said, we'll take them on. We, the lawyers, will take the government on. So the government won't prosecute us. So we did publicise it. We've been talking ever since, both Alana and I, and she's the brave one with 2 very young children. She would be here tonight talking, except that one of them broke his collarbone playing soccer, 5-year-old, and so she couldn't come tonight, and she says sorry and all the best to the rest of us for tonight. So look, the government decided to try and silence us even more, as you know, and in July 2015 brought in the Australian Border Force Act, which means that for speaking to you tonight about what happened in Nauru, I could well be subject to prosecution and go to prison for 2 years. And all of us speaking tonight. And it is shame. It's shame because it's silencing freedom of speech. It's an anti-democratic law, and one which I'm glad to say Doctors for Refugees are challenging in the High Court at this very moment. So we will speak out despite that, but it requires courage. And believe you me, the younger you are, the more courage you need, because the more the rest of the life you've got to live. Okay, so yes, it requires courage, but it's really important that we do this. The cause is incredibly important, that we speak up for freedom of speech, but even more, that we speak up for people in immigration detention who have no voice of their own, because that's what advocacy means. It means giving a voice to people who have no voice. Thank you.
Before I start my speech, I'd just like to refer to something that David said about asylum seekers going and making complaints or reporting incidents that occurred. It went beyond this as well, and there's an actual article in The Guardian about a 5-year-old girl being struck by a guard. And I say it went beyond this because even when staff witnessed incidents, they still got dismissed. So I'm not going to talk about that today, but I gave an interview to The Guardian because that incident was dismissed. And I found out about that incident being dismissed and found out that that abuser for over a year had not been found and could have had access to kids again when I was back in Australia when I had left. And that's when Wilson Security told the parliamentary inquiry they had insufficient information. Yet we gave his name. Yet their second in command responded to the incident. I've spoken here in Canberra 4 times now, so sorry for those who have heard me before. What I am saying about abuse, deplorable conditions, and a system which breaks people must be getting hard to hear. In fact, it's getting hard to hear for all of us. As month on month, yet another tragic story breaks. I'm sorry that I cannot paint a happy ending, as that would be a lie. If you choose to start taking a stand, to start questioning friends, family, politicians, to put the rights of a child, a human's first, I can tell you it's too late. Some things cannot be undone. However, although we cannot undo the torture and abuses we have subjected these men, women and children to, we can do the right thing, and we must. We must provide them with the support and safety that was their only crime in seeking in the first place. We must provide the services they require to start their road to recovery, with the knowledge that some may never recover. On my first rotation to Nauru, I remember sitting down with my department manager to talk through the aims and outcomes of the program in the family camp. I remember thinking to myself, wow, what a substandard program. However, looking back now and thinking about it, I think, how the hell did we manage to maintain and run that program? We went 11 months without new resources. Our 3.5 hours per day of programs was the only time children had access to toys. As staff, we were buying material with our own money and bringing it over in our luggage. This was not a substitute. We had just under 200 kids to provide for. Heat in sessions exceeded feel-like temperatures of above 50 degrees. We had a 1:15 ratio, which later turned to 1:30. This was not appropriate or adequate when working with highly traumatised children. My naivety was simple. I'd never worked in a place where a human's best interest, let alone a child's, was not put first. As a team, we requested a training session with a specialised trauma counsellor to ensure we were documenting everything appropriately, in hope we could get more children the help that they needed. We had to stop him and re-ask the question, as what he was describing was the manifestation of serious trauma, what it looks like in a young person's behaviour. I remember a co-worker's comment. You were describing just about every child we work with. We need to know about the acute cases. I shall share a story of a child who would follow me around and other staff, asking thousands of questions week on week. It was more for the interaction than the actual answers. He was the first there in the morning, the last to leave at night. This young boy would follow us right up to the point where the guards would have to turn him round, asking us to stay a little longer. Because as soon as we left, he was alone, in the dark, the eerie shadows cast by the big spotlights run by generators. His parents were so unwell they often didn't leave their tent. He would sometimes smuggle food out of the eating area to them as they missed some of their meals. I remember one morning I was down in the camp building some cricket nets. Now by cricket nets, I mean security fence held together with a bit of rope on the gravel. Not the SCG, but essential, as by this time the 150 Tamils had arrived. No one was really up, as it was 7 a.m. and not a school day, but of course this young boy was. He probably hadn't slept. He asked me a question with utter sincerity that broke my heart. Toby, what were your parents like when you were my age? I'm confused. My parents don't get up. They don't play with me. Other children play with their children. What is wrong with me? He was trying to understand if it was normal. Now, it's not that his parents didn't care or love him. They did. It's just the weeks that turned to months that faded into years takes its toll on mental health. From rotation to rotation, I'd see families, units breaking apart, the toll of the place coming too much to bear. Now this child is still waiting in detention for us to return the childhood we never had the right to take. One of the things which is important to understand is how controlled movement and forced containment creates traumatisation and further traumatisation of these vulnerable people. As they are not just only subject to the abuses, but they are also forced to witness abuses outlined in the leaked reports this week. And I'm going to use an event to show how this occurs. One night, a young boy came into the recreation tent, and I could see from his body language that something was wrong. What's going on? It was his brother. He was up on a roof, threatening to jump. He had been up there for over an hour. And his brother had come to me because he wanted me to come and try and help. When I arrived, I offered my help to the negotiators who were there in charge of the situation, as I had worked closely with this family. The sight I was greeted with was this young youth sitting huddled on top of this roof, looking down at mattresses that had been laid out below him. One of them had splatters of blood from someone's previous attempt. I looked around. There were his friends watching in great distress. But more distressing was that there was young children watching. One of them came up and asked me, "Toby, do you think he will come to recreation tomorrow, or do you think he'll jump?" I had to ask the older teenagers, which wasn't appropriate to do so, but it was the lesser of two evils to help me try and get these young children away. There had been no attempt to corner off the area. Now, this young man, after 2 hours up there, was hugely courageous, and he climbed back down. Later that night, after he had been risk assessed and assigned guards that would follow him within arm's length and sit watching him sleep that night, he came and spoke with me. This was common practice, as unlike Australia, the services are not there to fully support people in this situation. You would know, as a staff member walking into camp, who had tried to commit suicide the previous night, as guards would follow them around, ready to restrain them. He was still very upset, and he asked me a question that night. His question was, "Toby, I am a good person, you are a good person, and you are Australian. I am confused to why good people can do this to us. What would have you said to this young boy?" For me, it was not just the horrific incidents of physical and verbal abuse I witnessed that was confronting, or the incidents of self-harm or suicide attempts, or seeing the effects of sexual abuse has on a person. It was also the small things that hit home. A mother not being able to bake a cake for a child, a family celebrating a birthday with no presents, smiles on the surface, but when it's all over, the father breaking down in private, so ashamed he cannot provide for his family. A wedding anniversary in a mouldy tent. I remember a small child I worked with running up to me with a drawing. "Look, it's you." I wish it was me. I'd turned into Superman with red hair, one arm about double the size of the other. I'd missed leg day at the gym as I had 2 stick legs. "Oh, thank you. It's great. That's really kind." As I held that picture, my eyes dropped to the bottom corner. A big, chunky, squiggly letter had caught my eyes, followed by equally squiggly numbers. She had signed it with her boat ID. Now, young children are quick learners, which meant many adopted their boat IDs, as that is what every service provider, bar Save the Children, called them by. But imagine being a parent and your young child coming up to you and handing you a picture and seeing a boat ID, not their real name. Now, They're not all sad memories. There were many laughs. These children and youth showed resilience and courage in the most trying conditions after all they had been through. I remember one youth running up to me to show me what one of the others had made. He'd made a kite out of a garbage bag, skewers and sticky tape he had nicked from school. Now this kite was stupidly high up. Toby, it's 1 kilometre up. I could hardly see it, but I wasn't going to give him that credit. Nah, definitely not. No, Toby, I've measured it. With a big, toothy grin, he said, Toby, let's just say my teeth aren't too clean. What do you mean? He laughed. Well, it's 1.5 years worth of tooth floss tied together. It was sourced from all his mates. I think there was a lot of unflossed teeth in the camp. 2 hours later, when he managed to pull it down, he brought it to me, showed me how he made it. It was a very, very delicate operation to pull that kite back down. Now, I had to control a laugh when I saw it, as there was a very distinguishable, not so flattering cartoon on a piece of paper stuck on top of that kite. It said, "Fuck Tony Abbott, freedom." He wanted to teach the other kids how to make kites, as kites solved our resource problem. By this stage, we were towards the end of our 11 months with no material resupplies. This kite, Toby, you only need rubbish bags, sticky tape and skewers and a lot of tooth floss. He gave another reason, though, why to teach the other children. And that reason was, Toby, when I fly it, I feel free. These children were an inspiration in the midst of all the hurt. Their passions, their dreams, their talents, their jokes and smiles, their support for one another shone through. And maybe this is the biggest tragedy on all of this, that Australia didn't even give them a chance. I can tell you that we would have had a few amazing artists for Newtown in Sydney, a couple of stand-up comedians for Melbourne, a policymaker for Canberra who had more idea of the issues and systematic problems in the centre than all the managers combined, a young lady that would utterly be worthy of leading the UN one day, a leader we could all get behind. And she still might. I cannot describe the courage this young lady showed. She was battling such personal hardship, yet she always was there, standing up for people who'd been downtrodden, not faltering at what was needed to resolve the situation. And last of all, man, our A-League soccer competition might actually be worth watching. Now, the 2,000 reports that have been leaked paint a true picture of what I experienced and witnessed on the ground. We have seen in the media a lot of individual cases of abuse being published. However, I want to make a few broader points. If so many abuses are occurring, it's telling you something beyond individual acts by perpetrators and predators. Like the training of staff is not adequate for the situation they are working in. The infrastructure is not appropriate. The systems used by service providers are flawed. We need to hold account not just the individuals committing acts of abuse. Abuse on this scale does not occur through individuals. It occurs through the institutionalisation of abuse and the institutionalised acceptance of abuse. Whether it be incompetence or knowingly, those who oversee and have allowed abuse to continue are the kingpins to this system of abuse. It seems as a nation we have got to the point where we can no longer read one more article. It's too much, or maybe we find enough moral comfort from the government saying it has been dealt with, another report, another investigation, another inquiry being done, or simply saying it's been fabricated. So there's no need to act. Why question it if that might destroy that moral comfort and land responsibility on our laps? The pinnacle of this was when Peter Dutton stated, "Asylum seekers have self-emulated to get to Australia." As a nation, there was but a murmur. We did not jump up in outrage. You and I are not stupid. We know pouring fuel over your body and setting it alight almost guarantees you will die. When you are dead, you are nowhere. You're not in Australia. You're dead. So why did we accept this as a nation? I'm not sure. But maybe that absurd comment again in some way comforted us, that these extreme abuses outlined in official documents leaked were just part of asylum seekers' plans to get here. I recently gave an interview where the photographer halfway through broke down into tears from the recounting of my story, my experiences in Nauru. She said two important points afterwards. First, we as Australians have got too used to pushing these stories aside. She said, now, more than ever, we must not take the easy way out. We must confront these stories and understand them. So after tonight, please read some of the reports that have been leaked. Read what you and I have paid for. I can tell you it won't be easy, as it wasn't easy for me to witness them, nor to write them, and the many others not included in that leak. As the cost of our inaction as Australians are penned into these reports, inked into history, these are first-hand, frontline accounts, not rumours, not speculation. They give a small but shocking insight into the systematic abuse of men, women and children who sought safety from us. What is absent in these reports are the childhoods lost, the families broken, and the ongoing effects that this abuse leaves on the lives of innocent people. Thank you.
Mum's going to be excited she got a mention, I think. Firstly, thank you for having me and for sharing our grave concern about the men, women, children and young people being detained indefinitely offshore. I'd like to start by saying this is, as Jane mentioned, my first time. It is a first for me to speak out about what we witnessed in Nauru as workers, and more importantly, about what the asylum seekers and refugees have experienced and continue to experience every day. I'm shy and really nervous about public speaking, so please bear with me if I stumble through some of this. When I was first approached to do this, one of the questions that was presented to me was, why now? For me, this has been in the making for a long time. I like to pride myself on being an advocate and believe wholeheartedly that as privileged members of this world, we have an absolute duty to speak on the behalf of those who have no voice, or maybe whose voices are speaking but cannot be heard. I don't want to sugarcoat it. Speaking out is hard, and it is a moral dilemma that we all battle with, as we've heard before. The knots in my stomach right now, my inability to sleep properly at night, and that feeling of fear that gets caught in your throat is nothing in comparison to the suffering that children, men, women and young people experience in Nauru. So in saying that, not only is this the right thing to do, the necessary thing to do, but it is time to stand up to the oppression of not only the offshore processing institution, but to the Border Force Act, designed to purposefully instill fear and shut us up about what that institution is doing to innocent people. Before I share with you some experiences of the asylum seekers and refugees from Nauru, I'd like to quickly speak about the impact the entire policy has had not only on those at its centre, the targets rather, but to all those that have come into direct contact with it. It's hard to paint a picture of the trauma inflicted upon not only asylum seekers and refugees, but on professionals, but I'll try. I feel I can speak generally about this because I know many of my co-workers well. I've watched strong, energetic and hopeful practitioners start to second-guess themselves and to morph into shells of their former glory. I've watched trauma and PTSD take a hold of not only one or two of us, but nearly all of us, manifesting in one way or another. I've worked alongside people who have seen the aftermaths of genocides in other countries, who have worked with the rehabilitation of child soldiers, been actively placed in conflict zones around the world. And these professionals, with a wealth of experience, resilience and passion, who do the jobs the rest of us cannot even fathom, have been broken in one way or another by what they have witnessed in Nauru. I myself have spent time working in countries with significant poverty, conflict, displacement and suffering, but have never felt before what I have experienced emotionally, psychologically and physically in the aftermath of Nauru. If this policy was not damaging to the extent that it is, then the workers and witnesses coming out of Nauru wouldn't be as damaged as we are either. Of course, at the core of this issue are the innocent men, women, children and young people suffering the direct impacts of this policy. If we as workers are damaged, imagine the magnitude of their damage and the extent of their suffering. I've witnessed some of the impacts of this suffering firsthand, both the seemingly smaller incidences and the larger scale critical ones. I worked for 6 months with 29 unaccompanied minors, all male, under the age of 18 and all without their families. They were constantly grouped together, separated from the rest of the camp, separated on the buses from the other students, while always being referred to by the acronym UAMs. A cruel reminder every day, not that they could ever forget that they were there without their loved ones. The young men were extremely resilient, highly traumatised, as all the people in the camp, but they also somehow held their brilliant personalities intact. Despite being able to make us laugh on a daily basis due to their admirable outlooks marked by their persistent hope that things would change one day, they still reached breaking point. The incident report that has been released in the 2000 that was leaked outlines the mass self-harm in the form of cutting with razor blades that happened on the day they got pushed to their limit. I was in the camp with them that day. I can say that not only is the fact that young people spiralled so low that they felt they had nothing left to do but to cut themselves, but the lead up to it, that is not documented so well, is indicative of the oppression that they experienced that leads to incidences like this. Leading up to the 26th of September, which is when it happened, what is not shown in the reports but is well documented elsewhere, is that prior to this, there are months upon months of stagnant life, of waiting unsure of the future and of attempting to access channels of advocacy that simply get shut down. These young men were organised, articulate and extremely dignified in their suffering. They saw themselves deteriorating and they knew they deserved better. They used to organise themselves, talk softly and calmly together and then approach a member of staff, often one of us, and request an audience with our managers. They would then speak openly and incredibly bravely, not with anger or resentment, but with clever appeal to their human rights. They wanted to speak to the Department of Immigration, and they wanted answers about their refugee status determinations. They wanted to know why they had been transferred from Christmas Island to Nauru with promises of being resettled, when months later they were still languishing in detention. Then when the people on Christmas Island, the majority who had come on the exact same boat to Australia, got offered temporary protection visas, and Scott Morrison delivered a video message to those still rotting in Nauru, stating, "You will never come here." They did not throw anything, they did not cry, they did not yell and they did not scream. I wanted to yell and scream. I wanted to put holes in those stupid tents and I wanted to punch a hole in the TV. What kind of crap was this? What kind of justice was this? The same boat. I was unbelievably impressed with their dignity, although at this stage I would not have blamed them for losing it. The basis of their survival is built upon one dream, freedom, and they just got told, no way. And not by someone face to face, despite there being many representatives of the department on island, and despite all the previous requests they had made. It was through a video of Morrison. How offensive. After this, they warned us all of their inability to cope. They didn't simply react, they tried to get help to manage their deteriorating mental health. They organised themselves into a peaceful protest and sat on the rocks for about 24 hours, in the rain and in the sun. They were trying to bring attention to their plight and they were not doing it in an angry or aggressive way. They were doing the right thing. Remember, these are teenagers, they're like 14 to 17. They got met with no support and no acknowledgement. In fact, we as staff, instead of being encouraged to check in with them or offer emotional support, were encouraged, no thumbs up. Don't be seen to be supporting them. Don't smile at them, don't make eye contact. The next day, disempowered, institutionalised and fatigued, they tore the place and themselves apart. Many traumatised young people I've worked with in Australia would have done that reactively in direct response to being told their last atom of hope had just been taken away. The way the things are run on Nauru, directly and indirectly, causes people to reach the point in which they will self-harm, attempt suicide, or God forbid, set themselves on fire. I now have no doubt this is what this policy was designed to do, as we've heard before. I've watched it unfold with my own disbelieving eyes. When the young people were settled into the Nauruan community and finally got their refugee status hand-downs, they were faced with a whole new set of scary challenges and abuses, which I won't speak about today. After that, I went and worked with the child protection, so I stayed inside the camps. I was speaking to an old co-worker and friend last night, and I asked her, how do I even begin to capture not only the major suffering, but all the little things that were done to these people? We were reminiscing on how we used to bring resources, as Toby mentioned, into the camp all the time, including underwear, socks, toys, books, you name it. I mean, how is that stuff not easily accessible for people in a camp that costs billions of dollars to run? Or how I'd seen better living conditions in IDP, so internally displaced camps, set up by the UN after natural disasters in the northern Philippines. Or how a big delivery of toys that were donated by the Australian public for the kids never got to them, or eventually, like I think it was 6 months later or something. Or how a client disclosed to me that she had been sexually abused inside the camp by a guard, but despite reporting this previously, nothing had been done about it. Or about how we had to smuggle into the camp some paint and find a piece of plywood to paint a blackboard for the Tamil kids because they wanted to practice their maths, and that request was denied. Or how people were hoarded like cattle onto buses and then planes with no warning and no consultation and transported back to Nauru, always overnight, after being in Australia for medical treatment. Or how guards yelled out boat ID numbers like DIB 009, obviously that's not a real one, instead of children's names, and they would answer to them immediately. Or how the kids exhibited an alarming rate of sexualised behaviour, or how the toddlers were struggling to learn to walk on the rocks. Or when a 4-year-old girl said to me, "Hayley, is my mummy going to die? I feel like she hurts so bad she may die. I don't want to be alone here." Or the tears or screams of suffering that could be seen and heard daily, distressed mothers that could not cope. "Why did I bring my child here? What have I done to them? Look at them suffer." I want to tell you about one of the children I worked with, a 6-year-old. He was there with his mother and father, who were often so fatigued and mentally unwell, suffering from severe depression, like so many others in the camp. And they couldn't provide him with the attention and affection that he needed, so he'd often seek solace with myself or other staff members. My fondest memory of him is when he performed with his class in the recreation tent for Christmas in 2014. I don't know if you were there for that too. The teachers at the school organised each class to perform a song, and his was Thriller by Michael Jackson. He was dressed as a zombie and took to the performance like a professional actor, animated and engaging. The dance was perfectly in sync, and that night I saw glimpses of the vitality of life that children have. It was a beautiful moment, but one that unfortunately was an anomaly. Shortly after, the children soon returned to their fatigued, emotionally dysregulated and saddened states. During the day, I would often spend time with him in the camp, engaging in imaginative play and making up games with the limited resources we had. He was an extremely clever boy, all too aware of the world around him, and watching him attempt to make sense of what was happening to him was heartbreaking. After our activity, as tradition, we would sit down and talk. He often asked me questions about the camp during this time. Why is security mean to us sometimes? I never used to have so many bad dreams, now nightmares all the time, every night. I am scared to sleep at night. I don't want to sleep, so I lay awake and listen to my mother cry. Forever etched in my memory is the day he looked around him, at the rocks on the ground, at the high offensive fences, at the guards in khaki green militarised uniforms forever present, and then down at his ID badge with a boat identification number in bold, large writing, more predominant than the small text in which his name was printed underneath. He then looked at me thoughtfully and said, "Hayley, what have I done wrong? Am I a bad person? I thought the people that came into our house at night and hurt my dad, back in his country of origin, were bad. Am I like them? I feel maybe as if I've murdered someone. Is that why I'm here?" I replied, "No, you are not bad. You are clever, funny and kind. You should be so proud of who you are." He replied, "Then why am I in prison if I'm not bad?" I used to think this was an impossible question to answer, as I grappled with it myself. In the aftermath, I am now stronger in my answer to this question. You, innocent 6-year-old boy, and every other beautiful child on Nauru are being held indefinitely in detention by a group of people who run a country that is meant to be a champion of human rights, who is meant to be a signatory to this thing that we call the United Nations Convention, pledging to take in and provide safety to the most vulnerable in our world. You are being purposefully ignored, dehumanised on and off island, and you are being blamed by these people, you know, the same ones that are meant to be protecting you, for being so unwell, so unbelievably stretched to breaking point that you swallow bleach or razor blades, that you cut your arms and legs, that you try and hang yourself. I used to say sorry all the time on Nauru, to all the women, men and children, and I continue to say it now, although it seems inadequate in the face of their continued suffering. I'm sorry that despite having many better ways to process the claims of those seeking asylum, our government chooses an inhumane, indoctrinated hellhole that has driven people to suicide and continues to perpetrate harm on a daily basis. Sorry is not enough anymore. It has lost its touch, its impact, its meaning. What we need to see now is action. We need to see the closure of these camps and the rehabilitation of these traumatised people in Australia. I always get asked stupid questions by members of our great Australian public who don't agree with bringing them here. They constantly ask me, where are they going to go? Oh, you'd bloody house them, would ya? My response is without hesitation. Of course I would. In a heartbeat, I would open my doors to every single one of them. I'd like to finish with the voice of a 17-year-old refugee who is in Nauru right now and wanted me to share this statement today. Can you please tell them on our behalf we cannot take this anymore and it is becoming more difficult every day. Children, youth and parents are suffering in here. I believe people have access to these reports, so every report exactly matches to the situation we are living. We don't deserve to be victims of this policy. We deserve more than this.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to all those members of the Australian Border Force who are with us tonight. Just put your hands up if that's you. I notice you're not in your black and gold braided uniforms tonight. And you call me a spy. Firstly, tonight I'd like to talk about the sexual misconduct on Nauru and then talk a little about whistleblowing as we go. I spent a year on Nauru and Manus Island between July 2014 and July 2015, and I'll talk mostly about Nauru rather than Manus Island. There's a situation on Nauru where there's an incredible prevalence of sexual misconduct. And I think rather than attribute blame and prejudice and try to just hate people for what they do, I think as a psychologist and a traumatologist, it's more important for me to talk about why these things happen and what we can do to prevent them from happening. So let's have a look at Nauru for a moment. It's about the size of Melbourne Airport, 21 square kilometres, and there's 8,000 Indigenous inhabitants of Nauru. Through the centuries, of course, as breeding and inbreeding takes place, there's quite a lot of mix of the gene pool, and you get a situation where you get a particular style of person that comes out of this. It's like a melting pot there. The Indigenous Nauruan is about 5 foot tall and about 5 foot round. They have the highest rate of obesity in the world, and they have the highest rate of type 2 diabetes in the world. And when you look at the sexual conduct of this very tribal, ancestral kind of community, what you find is that it's an incredibly Christian-based island. It's split down the middle between Protestant and Catholic. I don't know why that happened, but in about the mid-1800s, even with the experience of Ireland, the bishops decided it would be better, and the missionaries decided it would be better just to split the island into Catholic and Protestant. But what's happened is that you have a very sexually repressed group of people, because on Nauru there's no pornography, there's no Facebook, there's no movie cinema, there are no R-rated movies, there is nothing on TV that's not beyond the general exhibition. The other thing we throw into this mix is that it's a matriarchal society. Descendancy on Nauru is passed down from mother to daughter. Only women can own land on Nauru. Women have status on Nauru. And so what you've got, particularly amongst the young men on Nauru, is this incredible sexual repression. They have no sexual expression of any kind until they are married. And when they are married, they will marry one of their own in a traditional tribal ceremony. And so these young, short, round men only know short, round women. Until you get 17 nationalities of exotic women from Iran and from Iraq and Sri Lanka and Burma and places like that. You've got these, for the first time, an experience where these young Nauruan men, who are the guards at the centre, come into contact with a different kind of woman. Add to that the fact that they are guarding these women, and that puts them in a position of power and authority, which they don't get at home. At home, it's an emasculated group. But in the centre, very naive, sexually naive Nauruan guards have power and authority over exotic women. You can imagine where that gets us to. The incidents that are described in the files are incidences of opportunistic sexual perversion and flirtation, seduction and grooming. The guards necessarily will take the opportunity to peek inside a tent flap, to enter a shower recess when a woman is showering, to exchange cigarettes in terms of sexual favour, or just indulge themselves in inappropriate verbal expressions to women about what they're going to do to them when they leave the centre and they go down into the community and when they track them down. This situation on Nauru breeds one of the highest rates of domestic violence in the world, and there is no law against domestic violence in Nauru. It's the fact that men can only express themselves in oftentimes drunken anger. The other side of the story is just as important to understand. Imagine if you're a single adult female and you're incarcerated on an island in the middle of the Pacific indeterminately. If you can liaise with a Nauruan guard to the point where you can form some sort of a relationship, to the point where you might even become pregnant to that guard, then in a matriarchal society, that's a ticket to Nauruan citizenship. And when you have Nauruan citizenship, you can go anywhere in the world. If you seduce an Australian expat guard to the point where you become pregnant to that guard, then you have a ticket to Australia. And this is a very, very desperate situation that we've provided here for these people. Now, I'm not blaming anybody. What I'm suggesting to you is that we have set up a situation where we have caused this problem sociologically, psychologically, anthropologically to exist. And we have to understand that to be able to find the resolution to it. And I'm not going to pretend that I know the resolution to that, but I would suggest that certain things have to change on Nauru, particularly amongst the young male guards, before this particular impasse is resolved. While I was on Nauru working as a psychologist and traumatologist, I had extensive training sessions to the guards and also the cultural advisors and the behavioural management people there on those issues of grooming, seduction, flirtation, just so that we could try for everybody to understand that this sort of situation requires a discipline. And of course, as Hayley and Toby have also alluded, it extends to children. Children are easy pickings for sexual predators on Nauru. And one of the reasons for that, again, from a sociological point of view, is that I've seen that there is a lack of attachment between the parents and the children. When you live in indefinite detention, you relinquish many of your responsibilities in life because people are making decisions for you and you're helpless and hopeless to make decisions on your own. And so parents don't attach to their children so much. They leave their children in the hands of Save the Children and the recreation officers and the teachers, and they detach from their children. And it's totally reasonable that they would, because they're depressed, because they have PTSD, and because they live in an environment where they don't know from one day to the next whether those children are going to be taken from them or whether they're going to suffer a disease and die. So I guess my message as an advocate and as a whistleblower is all about let's be serious about what we say and responsible about what we say, and make sure that we try to analyse things before we become emotionally involved with them. One story of a rape that I'd like to talk about just briefly is a well publicised and controversial case of a young woman who at 28 years of age was out on day leave from the camp, and she was viciously raped by a Nauruan male in the community. Now, without going into detail, this was not a vaginal rape, but it was a rape. It was a very vicious one. She was taken by the Nauruan police to the watch house and questioned for 3 hours before she was allowed to get to the hospital. Although she was bleeding, she had incredible lacerations due to the viciousness of this. At the hospital, she was only seen by male doctors and she was petrified. She had 3 weeks in the IHMS trying to recover from the physical bruising and lacerations that she endured during this rape. But she said emphatically, "I was not raped." She said it to the police, and the police dropped the charges, and they didn't investigate. She said it to the IHMS team, she said it to Wilson security officers who escorted her to and from the hospital. She made it quite clear she was not raped. And the reason why is because it was not vaginal. And her sense of shame as an Iranian lady, as an Iranian woman, is that it would bring shame upon her family and she would never be able to marry. She's a single woman at 28. Still a daughter, not a woman, even though you can be a woman at 13 if you're married. While ever she vehemently declared that this was not a rape, the papers took it up, the story got out, and we re-victimised her as advocates and as whistleblowers because we believed that it wasn't right and it wasn't just and it shouldn't have happened. But we took on our westernised view of this and we completely dismissed her wishes. And ladies and gentlemen, I have to say to you that many advocates do this. We re-victimise the people that we are trying to help because we need it to be sensational. It's very clear that the governments of both persuasions in Australia have painted themselves into a corner with regard to offshore detention. They are obstinate, they are arrogant, and they are unwilling to move, and it's bipartisan. It's bipartisan between both the Labor and the coalition governments. That's why it didn't get to the news during the election. Neither party wanted anything to be said about offshore detention leading up to the last federal election. I've given interviews all over the world since speaking up, but very few here in Australia. Whistleblowing. It's going to get you into a lot of trouble. If you care about money, forget it, because it'll ruin your job, it'll ruin your reputation, it'll ruin your career. At my time in life now, I don't mind that so much, because my kids are grown, I don't have a house mortgage to pay for, and I don't have many needs. And quite frankly, 2 years in jail will give me time to do my PhD, so I'm not that concerned about it. In May this year, early May, I met with David Marr and Ben Doherty from The Guardian. And at that point, I handed over to them 2,000-page dossier on every incident report from Wilson Security, Transfield Services and Save the Children Fund for the 12 months between July 14 and July 15. Within 2 hours of The Guardian going live, I received a dismissal from my contract with Psycare on Nauru. The email just said your services are no longer required. It's hard when you blow the whistle. At 60, I have nothing. I have no home. I live in a mobile home. I have no assets, I have no investments, I have no superannuation, I have no job. But it's still worthwhile because it's right. And what I've known all my life is that the one thing that's more important than all of that is integrity. And I know that when I do the right thing, things work out. They do. They just work out somehow. And so I'd like to encourage everybody in this audience tonight to do everything that's right and not to worry too much about the consequences. I don't believe the Border Force will lock me up. I don't think they'd be willing to. And I think, and this is a very encouraging show tonight, I think we're at a tipping point. I really do. And they just can't lock us all away. What a humiliation that will be to a brand new government fighting on 76 seats. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and eager to take your questions, but Jane's going to organise that as a panel, all of us. Thank you.